What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Riffing with Reid. I'm going to be sitting down today with Nate Brandt. He is our account director on one of our largest clients here at Digible, and we're going to be talking about customer experience. So the point of these Riffing with Reid sessions is to just go through different topics that are trending in the industry, things we're hearing about from our clients, or things we just think would be interesting for us to get a chance to go a little bit deeper on. So welcome to the show, Nate. Why don't you give us a little bit of your background first? Hopefully, there's some strong credibility here on why you're an account director at Digible. But yeah, just a little, of your career arc or story, and then we'll dive in and let you talk to us more about customer experience.
Yeah, career arc. I mean, I'll try and keep it quick. Hasn't been super long, but it's been long enough to add some detail in there. Um, Most of my career has specifically been working in agencies, so working for digital agencies specifically. And I've worked for a real small startup. I think I was employee number two at one of the first places I started, and then went kind of the exact opposite and worked for a real big agency that had a couple thousand. And so I've got to see kind of both sides and found a real sweet spot here with Digible of what that kind of perfect size company is, in my opinion. But most of my experience has been working directly with clients. Working on that account side, managing different sizes of clients and there's different sizes of clients and across different digital channels. And so I've got to see the full spectrum and got to dive in deeper in certain channels. But I had the opportunity to make my way to Digible and really focus in on managing teams here. And it's going to be 5 years in December, which is crazy since I've been here. So
That's awesome. Congratulations. Now you're going to get 100% coverage on your healthcare,
I'm right. I forgot about that.
unless Abby has better coverage, as well as some good travel stipends and things like that. See, lots of great perks here at Digital.
Pretty incredible.
Yeah,
Part.
shameless plug there to join the company. Before we go any further, maybe I'm going to start here. Is how did you guys approach it at when you're employee number two versus the much larger agency? Obviously, we'll get a little bit into how we think about things here at Digital, but just from customer experience, was there a big difference, a big gap in the way that you approached it, thought about it, that kind of extreme small versus much larger? And then what did you take away, I guess, from those as like kind of most valuable carry forward to Digital?
This will probably feel obvious when I say these things, but you'll identify, when I was at a very small startup, we were just trying to secure, any client that would stay with us and work with us long term, right? And so I think with that comes being super responsive and adjusting to whatever their needs are and really being at that call and able to respond to what they're requesting. And so for us, that was just availability was key. I think that actually helped us a lot. We didn't have a lot of clients when we first started. So just being available to answer at all times to whatever, little nuance that they were looking for and how things were done, that we would do that. On the flip side, working for a much larger agency, there's a lot more process involved. There's a lot more, hey, these are sort of the way that we're going to work together. And so having that outlined and making sure everyone understands, what we can, what we can't do, having those processes very clear for both the client and for our team and internally, I just noticed there was so much more structure that maybe at times felt too much. There was a lack of flexibility, but I could understand why at the size of that company it was that way. And so I've got to see both sides of the spectrum, and I think the size of the company really reflected that.
Totally. Makes a lot of sense. Seems like the trade-offs are clear. The larger you get, the more probably structure you have to put into it, but then you let go of maybe some of that availability or flexibility, that scrappiness, right? When you're first getting started and you kind of super serve the client, but is that really something that's sustainable,
Exactly.
So we'll come back to that, but I think the best place to start, because believe it or not everybody actually defines it the same way. So I'll give you a chance to wear your Captain Obvious hat one more time, but see if you could put a little different spin on this. How do you define customer experience? How do you think about that?
It's honestly, to this day, it's a hard question to answer. And the reason being is that I think it varies depending on your client. I think I could, think of one specific client and my answer might differ depending on who that client is compared to someone else. It might be, responsiveness. It might be, um, flexibility for someone else. Another person, it might be being able to break down complex information and really serve it up in a way that is digestible and easy to understand. Um, all of those things can be true. And so I think customer experience, if you have to sum it up in a very general way, is how do we make them feel, based off of what matters most to them. And so the answer, the response, the definition, I think can very much vary depending on who you're working with.
Yeah. Well, I was expecting, and not that I would have been disappointed if you hadn't said how we make them feel, but I think that's what most people come back to when it,
Sure. Yeah.
but as you were already ahead of, like, not everybody gets that great feeling, through the same mechanisms or the same instruments, right? And certainly that shows up for us in this industry with, whether we're talking to an operator, right, an owner, an investor, or a marketer, and naturally the situation they find themselves in and what they're prioritizing. But let's get underneath that now. So we've agreed that, it's how we make, or, a brand or a company makes a customer feel. What about categorically? Like what kind of, if you were to say really, when you unpack customer experience, there's 3 to 5, we'll say macro categories or buckets that really drive that feeling. What comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple things. I think the if you think about client experience and the different buckets that I could fall into, to me, it comes down to one of the buckets I would say is your ability to respond or how you handle situations, right? So that's kind of the first thing that I would point to.
Both in how we're communicating to them, but then, how effective we are at listening, right? It's like communication's a two-way street,
Yeah.
And it's like the 80-20 rule. It's like, how much should I be talking versus, listening or asking questions, that kind of stuff. And then I think you're dovetailing to like flexibility is one of my biggest buckets,
Yep.
/ agility. What would you say is one or two others that you would come up with?
I think clarity is a huge thing too, right? Being able to provide clarity around what we're doing, around data, around metrics, I think that is a huge thing in customer experience. If we don't know if they don't know what we're doing, or if they don't have an understanding of what's going on with their data or the reports that we're sharing, um, it's not going to provide any value to them. It could be the best data, it could be the best performance, but if they don't have clarity behind that, um, and maybe that's leaning into sort of the communication side of things, but I think that matters, and we can do that in multiple ways. But I think that's a huge thing in what we can provide.
Cool. So playing that back for you, you'd say not necessarily in order, but communication, no brainer, is critical as far as driving a good customer experience, making sure that, we're, giving them that feeling of like, and I think a lot of that's confidence that, is connected to communication. Is like, do they feel like they're with somebody that really knows what they're talking about, understands their pain points, all that kind of stuff, which ultimately drives confidence. You said flexibility and agility. Anything to elaborate there? Like, that's a tricky one, right? Because you can find yourself in that smaller company stage, and as you start to grow your customer base, how much you can hold on to that flexibility or agility. So I don't know if there's any more you want to add to like how to strike the right balance there. Because am I wrong that sometimes account managers can find themselves, providing too much flexibility, and it makes it difficult to set expectations, reset expectations, or just be able to maintain that level of, I guess, standards.
Yeah, yeah, and I think when it comes to flexibility, is you have to know when you can be flexible, and sometimes where where you do need to maybe hold the line a little bit to say, hey, in order to deliver the best outcome or deliver something from a timeliness, we may not be able to provide as much flexibility around this. That to me, I think comes down to more about the people that are best at that are the most proactive, right? I think the way that you can kind of get around that or get ahead of that are the folks that are really proactive. I think that really helps with sort of instead of being flexible and adjusting when things come through, it's being the people that are really good are proactive in their approach.
Totally. And you mentioned clarity. So, and for this, you're saying it shows up like in, just the crispness almost of like either direction or communication, strategy, etc. Um, you know, last thing you want is any kind of confusion or conflicting, I guess, priorities, communication, etc.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, communication is key. I think just being able to be clear, concise, being able to share that information, and then being a great listener is it matters so much in understanding what matters most to them.
totally. I'm going to throw two more at you and just curious to get your take on these. So I have critical thinking. Um, and I don't know, back to your comment, like it's different for everybody. If this one just for me seems to often index. But when I'm talking to account managers, vendors, partners, whoever, uh, it almost never goes the way you're expecting it. Like for me, especially when dealing with conflict or challenges, and that's a common part of account management. I mean, you wish everything was sunny and 72 every day, but typically it's not. And so as soon as you start to run into some of those challenges, issues, I want to know that somebody's on the other end of that call that has the capacity to think creatively or critically about a problem, a challenge, or a goal that I have, and find a way there and find it pretty fast.
Yep.
So I don't imagine you disagree with that, but would you say that it sits pretty high up on your list as well?
Absolutely. And I think to add on to that, one of the things I think often happens is that when you feel sort of those tense moments to like, okay, I need to problem solve this. They have, called out that this is an important issue or this is a hot topic or really important in our case, in our industry property that we need to focus on. The immediate thing to do is like, I need to come up with a solution immediately. And yes, that is what we're trying to provide. But I think where you can pause and say, hey, the way that I'm going to really be able to think critically and to give them the best solution is to lead with curiosity. I think oftentimes you want to just have the answer because it feels tense or the moment just feels like we need to get a solution quickly. That can all be true, but I think when you lead with curiosity by asking really good questions to really get to the root of what the issue is, or to maybe get some of that additional context that's going to really help you think critically, that's such an important step that I think sometimes people skip because they're trying to get to the solution quickly. And so remember to ask those questions. Remember to get to the root of what the issue is.
Totally.
I think that can be really helpful.
Totally. The one other one I had before we move on is connectivity. And so often, because, and I know that our clients can appreciate this, but they're talking to so many different vendors or partners. We prefer the P word, not the V word. That what probably is one of the more frustrating things is that we're not talking ourselves, meeting those vendors, those partners. And so it can be, I'm sure, frustrating, not a great feeling, where it's like, well, this is a kind of a hub and spoke. I just had this conversation with this vendor, but now I got to translate or pull out what's important, share that with Digible. Now I got to share that with, Entrata or with Zillow or Apartment List, whoever it is, right? And it just feels inefficient. And but it starts with knowing their universe and what success looks like in order to be able to connect dots. And a lot of times we won't have the access or the opportunity to connect with all of their other vendors. So we need to be really effective at connecting the dots. And I think you were talking about this a little offline as well, but just how you were saying that's one of the biggest challenges that we face is establishing common goals, that both the marketer but also their stakeholders might share. So anything to add there as far as both the opportunity, the challenge, the weight of connectivity?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a tough thing. I mean, I often use the phrasing of like, being able to speak the same language is key, right? And so there's so many different acronyms. There's so many definitions of maybe we're using the same word and we might mean different things. I mean, when you say the word conversions, that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, right? Depending on who you're working with. And so, um, being able to have a good understanding of how they define things or how we define things, finding that common ground, um, is so important to, I think, helping alleviate some of those frustrations that they have working with multiple different partners and different vendors and platforms. And so, hey, here's how I know you guys define this. So this is how we're going to speak to it when we're on the call together. That just makes their lives one bit easier. And that's our job to do that.
Totally. Now I'm going to take you to, I guess a common workshop, it seems like to me, but past companies I've worked at, when we've gotten into this topic of customer experience, they often will say, close your eyes and imagine, a brand or a company that you've worked with, that you've had an amazing customer experience, or on the flip side, we're going to keep it positive today.
Sure.
But just a great customer experience. And who was it and what drove that? So I'm curious for you if you can indulge us, me and our listeners. What's a company that really surfaced to the top in recent years for you as a great customer experience, and tell us why.
I think the one that comes to mind, when I worked here, that's probably why it pops into my head. When I was in college, plugging this a little bit, I guess, but when I was in college, I worked at REI, and I loved it. It was a great college job. Got free gear out of it. Had a great time doing it. But the reason I bring this up is because they had a policy when I was there. I think it's changed a little bit since, but at the time that I was there, is that you could return anything in any condition at any time. And I remember when I first joined, that blew my mind, that you could just return a product regardless of use. And what I got out of that was that they believed it's not so much getting lost in how long did they have this, and what was the price of it, and do we have a receipt, and getting lost in some of those details and minutia that drives us crazy when we're working with, with customer service or situations like that. They overlooked all that and just said, we will take it. We will replace the product. We want you out there exploring, enjoying yourselves, being out in nature. And that just stuck with me, was that their goal aligned with ultimately what the customer's goal was to go and enjoy just the outdoors. And I think the way that we can relate that back to our situation, that's just stuck with me, is how I think about it, is that ultimately, like, yes, we have SLAs, we have process that we need to follow, we have rules that we need to align on when we work together. But I think ultimately we can't lose sight of what that common goal that we're trying to share is, right? We're trying to help you, lease your property. We're trying to help you reach those occupancy goals. And so if we can help you find ways to do that, that might fall outside of kind of, some of the standard norms of way of doing things, the client will remember that. I think our partners will remember when we said, hey, I know this is the way that we do things, but I recognize that this is a really important property for you, or a really important moment, and we're going to figure out a solution that works for you. They're going to remember that you took the time to recognize that. And totally, that's what stuck out to me about REI.
Yeah, no, that's great. So you mentioned offline that that policy no longer exists.
I think they changed it. I think it's now like within 1 year. So it's still a pretty good policy. I think if you're bringing back, 3-year-old used socks, that,
Yeah, you got to draw the line somewhere.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, I'm curious why you think that policy changed, though, knowing that it left such an impression on you, and I'm sure you're not the only one. This kind of leads me to like what's difficult about maintaining a great customer experience. And so I think this is a good example of like how hard that is when you find a winning policy, meaning something that really feels great to a customer, but then you can't hold on to it.
I imagine, I don't know for sure. I mean, they were already obviously a very large company when I worked there, a national company. But I imagine cost at some point, it just got too expensive. So they had to put some sort of guardrail on it. And maybe it was that 1 year policy to say, hey, we still want it to be about getting people outdoors no matter what. But 5-year-old socks is maybe not the thing that we can accept. I'm using a socks example, but
I don't know if it's just an example, but
yeah,
I'll play along.
yeah, right.
I have this friend that,
Yeah,
I know this concern that,
exactly. But I think at some point, as you get to a certain size, maybe, or maybe the cost got too high for them, they had to make that call, and that can sometimes look. We end up in those situations where we have to change the way that we do things because of that.
yeah. Well, I think that's one of the hardest things getting into why maintaining a great customer experience is so difficult is inevitably the customers, like what they're going to value is likely going to change. And customer by customer, as you were saying, it's very individualized. But then if a company is growing, whether it's cost, or, whether it's, just people reimagining, the customer experience. But my point is that things are going to change. How do you measure what's really working and what's not when there's so many variables is really, I think, one of the hardest things about maintaining a great customer experience. Because you often will assume, and I'm not saying that instincts aren't often fairly accurate, in some cases, mostly accurate. But, I think when you and I were talking about this, I mean, there's like 30 different things that might impact customer experience. And so, yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts there on like, do you pull one thing out at a time, add one thing out at a time? And how much of it do you think you can rely on kind of qualitative versus quantitative data? I mean, I don't want to go, probably end up like this becomes sprawling. So I'll just stop there and ask if you have any thoughts on how to go about measuring and managing, a great customer experience.
I think at some point you do have to kind of narrow down to like, what are the things that we really think are a good measurement of our customer experience. I think it can be easy to get, especially, customer experience is a hard thing to measure. There's other things where there's very clear numeric ways to value things. Customer experience is harder not to get stuck in some of these vanity metrics, right? And so I think that is a challenge for us. But I think if you can narrow it down and to really define what are the things that we have identified really do have an impact with our clients. And when when those things aren't going as well, and we notice that that's where we get the most feedback, or, unfortunately, maybe that leads to churn. Those are the things that we need to focus on. So I think sometimes when, as we get bigger and we start to think about these things, actually narrowing it down and simplifying it might be the best approach.
Yeah. Well, I guess I want to spotlight your comment of where we get the most feedback. So I just finished this book, Rework, and one of the things, principles in that book related to, and I don't know if it was explicit to customer experience, but is pay attention to, they may have labeled it as noise, I can't remember, but for better or worse. So wherever you're getting lots of feedback, whether that's also your employees, because I think that actually may have been where it was pointed, but pay real close attention to that, because sometimes you get desensitized, or you're too focused on something else that you're not really listening, where there's the most noise just sounds negative. So, but just comments. And that often you'll hear that for better and worse, right? Where people are like, hey, that was awesome, and if you get like 10 of those on a specific topic, lean into it. And then if you get 10 where it's like, this is really frustrating me, same thing. I think sometimes we overcomplicate. And so I love how you're saying narrow it down, simplify it. But I will tell you this, I have a small gripe with NPS and CSATs. And because people got inundated, so I understand how we got here, but with tons and tons of surveys, and I'll just say more in depth, like customer experience, like interviews, we overcompensated, I feel like, in a way, with these tools where it's like, would you recommend us or not? And then you do 10 of those and you either, have 80% or 90%. And I'm oversimplifying it. I get it. But generally speaking, the more recent CSATs and then, how NPS works, it takes less than 3 minutes to fill that stuff out. And it doesn't tell you a lot to me. all it can give me is directionally I'm doing something right or directionally I'm doing something wrong. And so I think back to like the challenge of measuring customer experience, there's so many variables that drive it and it's so individualized. And, we have probably at some point overdid it, in trying to understand that, with consumers that right now it seems like maybe we've oversimplified it and we're not getting enough information.
Yeah, I mean, it's that challenge of like, hey, if you made it super specific, and let's say you put this NPS or CSAT score, survey out there, and you send it to 100 of your clients, and if you made it super specific because you're trying to get to that detail, what if you only get 5% responses?
Mm-hmm.
That, maybe that is just a very specific person that has a very, specific way of looking at things. And so by making it broader, simplifying it, you're going to get a higher volume of responses that may give you a better indication of what direction you're going. But to your point, if you go too simplified, if you go too broad,
what are you really learning?
What are you really learning? And so what's that sweet spot? And maybe for each company, it's different. Maybe for us, we can be a little bit more specific as we say, hey, we've gotten the feedback that these are maybe these are the three most important things that we need to be paying attention to this year. Of these three, what is the most important for you?
Yep.
Maybe that takes it one step further, but it's not to the point where we're only getting, 5 out of 100 responses.
Yeah.
So finding that sweet spot. And again, I think that varies depending on who's sending it out.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to hear, from our listeners if you have a better approach, some type of recipe that we have not heard of or aware of, and how to effectively measure. And most likely it'd be resonant experience, but somewhat one and the same. Just we're talking kind of generally speaking customer experience. Would love to hear it. I'm going to move us to. I don't know if this is something I've ever asked before, but I feel like I'm going to start asking this more regularly when we especially are doing deeper dives on certain topics. But what would you say is the most overrated part of customer experience and most underrated part of customer experience? So let's start with, again, I was trying to keep it on the positive mostly, but yeah, where do you think maybe people over-index when they're thinking about customer experience?
Yeah.
And qualifier, sorry, Nate. This doesn't mean you're saying it's unimportant.
No.
You're just saying out of all the things that can drive customer experience and you could focus on, maybe these we're over-indexing a little bit these days. Trying to make it a little easier on you.
Yeah. I think when I think about overrated, oftentimes, and this is not, this isn't a brand new statement. People have probably heard this before, but, you've heard that phrase, the customer or the client is always right, and some people have said, hey, that's not true. Some people very much believe it is. I would say, when it comes to their goals or what's most important to them, yes, they are 100% right. It's their goals. It's what's most important to them. But, when it comes to tactics, when it comes to strategy, that is why we're working together. That's why it's a partnership. You hired us to be experts. Let's work together and problem solve that together. And so maybe the solution that they have, we might disagree. And I think that can sound like that would be an issue. But if you have a relationship built on trust and you have a relationship with that partner that is focused on communication, they know that you might disagree with the solution that they have proposed on how we move forward. But it's coming from a place of like, I want the best and I know what our goals are, aligned goals are. And so let's talk through this. And so I look at it as like they have hired us to be experts and that they have hired us to disagree with them or to have a different thought or to add some more context or to add sort of the expertise that we bring to the table. They have hired us to bring that on purpose. And so, yeah, that can be something that is overrated if we just are always in agreement.
Totally. You didn't ask, but I'm gonna give you one of my. And I expect this to. I don't know if it's going to surprise you or anyone else, but I'll say it's a little unorthodox, but it's a positive attitude. So, again, I'm going to give myself refresher or reminder on that qualifier. I'm not saying this is unimportant.
Exactly.
but I am talking about what might be overrated. And the reason I say that is, and maybe too much from personal experience, but uh, it can drive me crazy when I'm talking again to, I'll just say, an account manager of any variety, and they're acting like things are sunny and 72,
Yeah.
and I have a big problem, or I'm just not in a great mood that day, whatever it is. But I I don't need or want. I'm not coveting positive attitude right now. I'm coveting like reflection, like meaning reflect, like the whole like mirror your client, mirror your, customer. I'm not in a great place. So tone it down. I need authenticity.
Yeah.
So that's more what I covet and prioritize. But, I feel like many account managers, when they first come into that world, they're told you've got to always have an incredibly positive attitude. But if you're not paying attention to signals, that could actually irritate somebody on the other end.
Well, especially like we've got a lot, most, our clients are very smart. And so I think they're going to be able to say, like, I'm looking at the report and like performance wasn't too great this month. We need to dig into this, right? And so if we come in with this overly positive attitude, like nothing's wrong, you're going to lose trust. So I think your word authenticity is perfect there. Just saying, hey, we recognize what's going on here. Here's how we're working to fix it. Here's how our team's proactively, trying to fix the problem. I recognize this isn't where we should be. I trust that so much more than if someone was going to just come in and say, hey, it's all good, don't worry about this, and try and glaze over any issues, right? And so I think your phrasing of authenticity is key.
Cool. All right, let's move to the other side. And I don't know again if this is now moving us more to the positive spectrum, but what's most underrated when it comes to customer experience?
Can I give two?
Of course,
All right.
absolutely.
I think underrated is knowing your audience, which sounds like a very simple response, but knowing your audience, I mean, if you think about our industry, the our team could be working with a marketing manager that maybe oversees 2 properties, or we could be working with a regional vice president that oversees 100, or we could be working with an ownership group that they have all three of these individuals may have very different KPIs or things that they care about. And so knowing your audience when it comes to the metrics and KPIs they care about, but then also their preferences as people. They might be someone that is, hey, I just need to know the 3 bullet points of what went well and the 3 bullet points of what we need to work on. Your 3 recommendations. Let's get through that. Let's be efficient. I want the follow-up email. Let's move on. I'll hear from you next week. Other clients may say, I need the context. Can you help break this down for me? Can we talk through this and problem solve out loud together so that I really understand this? And if I need to translate this information to my team or, who I need to talk to, my boss or whatever, they feel really comfortable doing that. And it's our job to know how to communicate differently depending on who you're communicating with. So in a very simple way, know your audience.
Totally agree. And pun intended here, but I'm going to expand this to the universe. I don't have my hand close enough to the whatever dial I should, be playing here for a bad dad joke or something.
Yeah.
But I say expanded the universe, meaning I think it starts with knowing that individual. But if you can expand to really knowing the full either universe or ecosystem, that's when it's next level. Is like I get how everything, the relationships, correlations, connections in your universe. I know the stakeholders. I know what the overall goals are. I know what your tendencies are. I know what's trending within your company, much less the industry. So if you're able to broaden that out, which may feel daunting, but people might surprise themselves. Like if you know the right questions to ask and when, you can get there actually faster than you might expect.
Totally.
And then if you have command of their full ecosystem or universe, that can be an incredible, feeling, that you're generating each time that you interact with them.
Yeah. And I think that just goes back to if they feel that they are gaining or they have this expertise from their account manager, regardless of who's communicating with them, they're going to feel so comfortable to say, I have a new hire. Can they hop on a call with you so that they really understand what you guys do? Also, we have this ownership group that really wants to dig on this property. Can you hop in on this call and problem solve or talk through this report with us? They're going to trust you that you are the expert because you can communicate in all those different styles.
100%. You said you had two.
The second one I thought of is about thinking about providing solutions for your employees. And so what's underrated about customer experience, you oftentimes wouldn't think about your employees as being something that is a top priority. But the reason I bring that up is that if our team has the right, if they are able to do their job well, if they are able to do their job efficiently, if they have the right resources at their at their fingertips, and they are going to be able to provide solutions and answers to our clients faster, more, in an easier way, that's going to bring value to our clients, right? And so the customer benefits when our team benefits. And so being able to identify sort of the roadblocks or the challenges that my team is dealing with and say, I recognize that this is a problem. We need a better solution for this. I am going to focus on solutions for my team. That ultimately actually does lead to a better customer experience. And I think that can sometimes be underrated if you are, listen, we need to focus on the client and the customer. That's our jobs. But if we can help our team do their jobs better, that's going to happen no matter what.
Totally. It actually similar for me when I think about some of the, this is the first, it won't be the last time we say AI, maybe in this episode, much less on the podcast, but, and how that's being used for workflow and operations and stuff. Well, actually, let me back up. I was going to say towards clients. So a lot of like companies right now are like, how are we improving our products, our services, our value proposition with AI, and not thinking as much about how they could apply or leverage that internally. And I think what you're saying for me is a bit parallel to that, where it's like lots of companies are thinking, how can we invest and create a better customer experience? And I'm not saying fully ignoring, but not thinking as much about how they can drive a better customer experience, which would include helping with solutions, making sure you're listening, getting good feedback, training, investing in those employees. Because ultimately, that is, as you said, going to drive a better customer experience. So yeah, the two are very connected, whether that came through or not. Between Nate and I, you were way more elegant in how you were describing that.
Well, and I would just say, I don't think they need to be separate of each other either. I think oftentimes when we're building solutions, for what is a good product for our clients, how are we going to, be able to provide that solution or service for our clients? We ultimately have to think about how that's going to work internally. And so if we are building solutions that create efficiency or just make our team's job easier, we're ultimately thinking of what that product looks like as an output as well for our clients. And so I don't think they're mutually exclusive.
Agreed. Okay. Let's see. I usually don't look at a list of questions, but I wanted to keep myself semi-organized because there's so much to cover with the customer experience. What's the best way to approach a customer experience? So this is more like, somewhat, I guess, thought experiment, but if you were building a customer experience from the ground up, how would you approach it? Like you said, so many different elements to customer experience. So if you were a new PMC, you don't have to play that. You could say if I were starting another agency or something. But yeah, what does that look like? How do you build that from the ground up?
I think one of the first things, if we were building something from the ground up, I often think about, what has my experience been like in this world or in this scenario, right? An example I could give is like when I first became a manager, the way that I first approached it was, I'm going to approach this as all the things that I didn't like, or all the things that I didn't like about previous, supervisors or bosses. I'm going to kind of approach it in the opposite way. I think that would be a very interesting place to start, right? You have to start somewhere. So from a customer experience standpoint, what is the experience that you had that you really disliked, and say, I want to fix that or I want to change that? I think that's a really solid place to start. From there, I think where you need to go to is listening. I think the different ways that you can do that, whether it's through, um, having small groups, through surveys, through, whatever you can do to get that feedback and asking the right questions. Um, Listen to what people are talking about, what people care about. That's where it is. I mean, if you're paying attention to that, you're going to get the answers that you want. And so making sure that you're flexible enough. We use that word a lot today, but you can also iterate on what you're doing too. It's important to have a clear vision of what you want your experience to be. But if you're not willing to adjust and stay flexible based off of the feedback that you're getting, I think you can sometimes end up, down a path that you didn't want to be.
Great. Love all three of those, really. So playing it back again, you started, and this was thinking more as a manager, but I think it totally translates on what you learned you didn't want to be or include kind of in your approach, and then deep listening, and then flexibility, knowing that things are going to change. I think that's a great way to think about it if you're just trying to formulate, how you're going to attack customer experience. In particular, though, like almost those non-negotiables, it's like, this is who we are not going to be, or how we're not going to do this. Sometimes that can be more powerful, because you can get carried away with like aspirational, like, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do this. And if you just, you often don't hear what you're not going to be or what you're not going to do. That really, really resonates. Okay. Last question. We're going to wrap this up. And I don't know if we're saving the best for last, but, is AI and the impact that it, is having right now a customer experience, and maybe what we forecast as we look a little bit further ahead. I know you were interested to get my take and, just how we at Digible are thinking about this. But let's start with you. Any kind of immediate, I guess, comments, thoughts, as it relates to the impact AI is having on customer experience?
Yeah, I mean, we could go in a lot of different directions with this, right? I mean, I think the speed in which things are changing is pretty incredible. I'm sure the way that we talked about this, if we had this conversation 6 months ago, is probably different than we are now, and it might even be different in 6 months, right? That just shows the speed in which things are changing. I think it will continue, in the very near future to be a tool that will bring efficiency. I think the way that we think about, if we are using it as a tool and not as the solution for how we communicate, or we work with our clients, it will be beneficial, but that's going to change. And so recognizing how that will change, and how human connection will remain one of the most important things, as it continues to get more and more part of the processes of what we do on a day-to-day basis, not losing that human connection. I think what I mean by that is we will continue to see emails, become more automated. We will continue to see AI get more involved with providing analysis, and we need to know how to use that in the right way. But ultimately, I think if I'm, thinking about on the flip side, if I'm getting hit with all these emails that I'm starting to identify is probably AI, what I'm going to cling on to is that human connection that I have with Reid. Mm-hmm. I trust Reid. I trust your recommendations. I trust the conversations we've had. And so having those skill sets, knowing how to communicate, and to, work with your clients in that way isn't something that's going to go away fast, even as we have these, AI solutions that are going to help provide efficiency. We can continue to use those as a tool, but to me, the human to human interaction will become more valuable than ever.
Yeah, maybe more sacred, kind of precious. Anytime I've been asked something either directly related to this or adjacent, it always brings up the story I heard about Jeff Bezos being interviewed not long after he acquired, or they acquired, Amazon, the Washington Post, and he was asked, 100 years from now, he thought a paper would still be printed, and he didn't even hesitate. He said yes, and whoever the journalist was like, almost thought he was kidding. They were like, really? Why would you think that?
Yeah.
Mr. like future, like tech monarch, and he said because of the experience of having and feeling that paper in your hand. And then he went a little further and said, we still see horses and carriages in downtown, don't we? Go to New York, go to any, a lot of major metros, and you'll see that. And it's not because they need a horse and a carriage to get around. It's because of the experience. So I thought that was pretty profound. But people overwhelmingly favor cars, right? And so my answer to this I guess, is similar in that I think more than we realize, actually, and I don't disagree with your, I guess, thoughts or belief around the sacred, kind of experience of human to human. But I do believe that more and more people are going to get comfortable with interacting with AI. I mean,
100%.
I'm not going out on a limb saying that, but I think optionality is the key. I think that's the key. And that's how I expect Digible to approach this, and let the data and don't try to rush it. Like, it's going to take time to see what the right balance is, and it's going to be a moving target forever. But what we want to make sure we're always offering is that human to human. Like, I as long as I'm here, like, we're never going to go full AI where now our clients are just greeted with a bot, and that's the only way that they, can do business with us.
Yeah.
No matter how attractive that might look on a P&L, which is what a lot of larger companies and even smaller ones are excited about. And no matter how advanced it gets, no matter how good that bot or AI experience is, we will not do that as long as I'm here. But I do expect that ratio, I guess, of people wanting some, if not a lot more, interaction because of their own feelings of efficiency. It's like, well, right now, as much as I love Nate, I kind of just want a quick answer.
Yeah.
We want to be able to provide that probably through technology, right?
Yeah.
So that it doesn't slow things down. And then we'll see over the course of the next few years, how much that changes. But optionality is expensive. And that's why a lot of companies, I think, are maybe thinking this more binary, where it's like either we're going to stick to our roots and we're going to maintain a mostly human first kind of approach to customer experience, or we're going to be forward thinking. We're not going to be late adopters. We're really going to embrace AI, and we're willing to let go of some of our clients or some of that customer experience that is more human based. It's just a trade-off. I don't see it that way. I don't think if you can afford to provide options, that's what I think you should do. And then again, let over time you figure out how to react to the ratios as they shift.
Yeah.
Makes sense?
No, I think you're spot on, because I think I think if we lean too heavily one way or the other, if we don't look at it as, to me, it's going to be we utilize it as a solution to get to answers maybe faster. It is going to help so much with analysis. We already all know that, right? That will maybe help us. That will enhance us to do our jobs better. But I think some people, like you said, they may just say, I need that quick response. There's going to be benefits to using AI to provide that information the way that it already is. So to me, I think I look at it as like, it's not one or the other. To me, especially at this point in time, it's how it enhances us to provide a better customer experience instead of replacing it.
Totally. All right. Well, I'm not going to say I think that does it, because we know we could go for 3 more hours. It's such a big topic. And I look forward to us potentially coming back and unpacking a few other elements of it. But yeah, if there's comments, questions, things that you guys would love to hear more about or have opinions on related to customer experience, just drop it in the comments or hit us up direct. You got Nate Brandt, Reid, and till next time.